Welcome everyone to Egg Harbor Library. We are here to talk gardening. Oh, the sun is out. Gardening, that'll be wonderful. But I have a special guest here, Sue Kunz, who's going to be telling us about the garden door in winter. And she'll have lots of good things to tell you about gardening and about the Master Gardeners of Door County, which is a very vibrant group of people. They run the garden door, and she'll give you all good information about that. So I will let Sue take over.
Really quickly, Janine, just a couple of housekeeping items. If you do have any
Sure.
questions, we're hoping that you hold them to the end. And then if you're joining us on Facebook, go ahead and message them on Facebook, or if you're on Zoom, put them in the chat. Otherwise, Sue will answer all of your questions at the end.
Great, thank you. All right. Hi, I'm Sue Kunz. I'm one of the Master Gardeners here in Door County. I'm going to take you on a tour of the garden door in the winter months. Most of us spend time in the gardens in the spring, summer, and fall and really appreciate the beauty of the gardens. I don't know if there's many of us who really spend time going through a garden or a botanical center in the winter. There's a lot of interesting things to see, the winter definition. Sometimes you can even still see colors of flowers blooming in December and January. So the garden door had its origins in 1995 when the Master Gardeners first established as an organization. And they decided that they would really like to have a show garden of some sorts. Obviously, it took a fair amount of planning. And 10 years later, they had an open house in July of 2005 to open the show garden, which is now called the Garden Door. The Garden Door is located in just north of Sturgeon Bay on Highway 42. This is a mouthful to say, but it's located at the University of Wisconsin, the Agricultural Peninsular Research Station, and I just goofed that all up, but we call it PARS to make it really easy. Anyhow, it's on approximately an acre of land, and the gardens are divided up into about 20 different garden beds that are each headed up by a supervisor or supervisors that maintain the gardens, and some have just certain specific plants, such as the grass garden. Other garden beds have a variety of plants to give gardeners an idea of what can be done in their home gardens. So let's get started and take a tour through the garden. Most, or probably 98% of all of the structures built on the property have been designed and built by master gardeners. So we actually have some very, very creative people in the organization. There are also a lot of hardscape sculptures, glass sculptures that are done by different master gardeners. So this is the entryway to the garden door. This structure, as I had mentioned earlier, was built by one of our master gardeners. In the spring and summer and fall months, it's covered with just absolutely beautiful blooming wisteria and climbing roses. But in the wintertime, we have just the, oops, I didn't start my slideshow. Okay, here we go. So then just looking through one of the diamonds of the arbor, we see this pop of bright green color. This is one of the pots that is over in the sundial, the sedum garden area, which we will get to on the tour. But it's just nice to see that pop of color. Then we have, looking in the garden, we are standing right in the arbor, and the arborvitaes are straight ahead of us. And right in front of those arborvitaes is the rose garden. And then this beautiful kaleidoscope structure, which has a double viewing. It's planted with a pot of annual flowers each year. Every year it's a different variety. And by giving a gentle spin to that kaleidoscope base, you can see an absolutely exquisite swirl of colors. Here's a nice close-up of, these are the seed pods from the wisteria plant. So it gives some interest to that type of plant. You see that nice deep cocoa chocolate brown. You can see the actual seeds inside the pod, and then the interesting snow gathered on the structure of the arbor itself. This is just one of the many evergreen trees out there. You're kind of seeing the edge of the conifer garden. There's a dwarf conifer garden just in front of that. And then you can see the gazebo in the far distance. So here we are in the dwarf conifer garden, and I'm going to mostly talk about this little plant right here. That is a Chamaecyparis piscifera, or in other terms, it's a false cypress. This variety is the Harvard Gold. I absolutely adore this particular pop of a color of a plant. I have a different variety in my front garden beds at home. Mine is the Golden Mop variety. I have them planted in 2 different garden beds, and it remains this bright yellow green color year round. So if the snow doesn't get too deep, you see this yellow popping up through the snow. And then in the spring, as the snow is melting, you see this absolutely beautiful bright yellow green before any of the flowers are in bloom. It stays like that for the entire year, not just for a growing season. So that's an interesting plant, I think, to have in the garden. And then you see this beautiful blue spruce here. So it's playing off the colors, the yellows and the blues. So now we're headed right into the rose garden. And these are the rugosa roses, which are the old-fashioned rose bush. A few of the slides, you're going to see a contrast between the winter picture and a summer or fall picture. So on the left-hand side is our winter picture, and you see the beautiful rose hips covered with snow, and you see that bright green pop of that pot from the sedum garden that you can see through the rose bushes. In the it's probably late summer, early fall photo on the right-hand side, you can see the leaf texture and structure of the plant, and then that pretty little rose hip just on the edge of the photo. I don't have a picture of it in bloom. I had pictures, but I could only post so many. But when you enter the rose garden on a day when these rose bushes are in bloom, and there's a large mass planting of these rugosa roses, it is that deep heavenly scent of the old-fashioned rose water that some of you might remember. One last look at that kaleidoscope with the arborvitaes as the background. This is an idea of what we can see in the hard texture sculptures. This is, I typically enter the garden and walk to the left and meander on the path going that way. So that's the way I'm going to take you on this tour through the garden. This structure really shows off in the wintertime, that bright pop of orange and the green encased in that concrete block. However, by mid-summer, it's almost completely covered by all the plants growing around it. You can see it, but it certainly doesn't stand out as boldly as this. Here we are coming to the pond. The side-by-side pictures, the one to the left, here is, you can see a little bit of the definition of the lower pond, the rocks around it, and then this lovely garden, metal structure garden bench here. What's so nice about the grasses are you can actually see through grasses. So you're getting the texture, you're getting the color of the snow on the blue spruce to the back there. And then further back, you can see the pergola or pergola, however you like to pronounce it. There's lots of climbing vines on this pergola. So it's an absolutely exquisite area. It's very peaceful to be near the pond. You hear the trickling water. Excuse me, we got a little ahead of ourselves here. And then the slide here on the picture here on the right is just looking at the pond from a different angle. So you're getting to see the birdhouse and the arborvitaes, which tend to border all around the gardens. And now you see the grasses again, and then this very wide blue spruce, which I've got another couple more in the pictures. Here you see just another little angle and yet another garden sculpture of the heron. But just such beauty that a winter garden can bring if you just take the time to look at it and appreciate it. So this is the same weeping tree. It's just taken from two different angles. So the picture on the left, I'm standing on the path, taking the picture across the pond towards the tree. And the other picture on the right is I'm standing behind the pond, taking the picture looking out towards the rest of the garden. And you can see in the background the grass garden. There's the gazebo over in the far corner. There's what's called the wentz. It's a fence that's the back border of the garden. And again, all of these structures have been built by master gardeners. So this tree is called a Caragana arborescens, which it's a weeping pea shrub. It has a very delicate, lacy leaf pattern in the summer, in the growing season. It's kind of a bright greenish yellow. And then it does have real delicate little yellow flowers on it in the early spring. So that gives a nice added pop of color in the spring. Many of the benches and seating areas throughout the garden are benches that have been donated to the garden door in memory of a particular member. This bench is sitting right on the path as you come around the corner from the rose garden. So it's sitting right on the edge of the rose garden, and it's looking onto the pond, which is quite beautiful to just sit there and watch the birds flit around, listen to the water trickling, and it's very calm and peaceful. You wouldn't know that you were right off the highway. The noise of the sounds of the pond literally kind of shadow the sounds of the highway traffic. And in the background on this picture, you can see here's the entryway where we came in. I'll reference this tree a number of times. This is a hydrangea. It's way over in the shade garden, which is one of the last gardens that we will visit as we're walking around or touring through. This is that blue spruce that I was talking about. It's called they call it a fat Albert. It's a Montgomery blue spruce. So it gets quite wide. It gets tall, but not as tall as like a Colorado blue spruce that can be 70, 80 feet tall. But look at how pretty that is with the snow covering it, much heavier snow cover on the spruce. But you can also see a nice light snow covering on that really pretty grass. Here we are at the pergola now, and there are a lot of different vining plants growing on here. It's quite exquisite, but look at this great pop of color. This is an American bittersweet, so you still see that bright kind of red orange of the bittersweet. On the back side of that pergola is a plant called Dutchman's pipe. It has a very wide, broad leaf, and you wouldn't even know that it was a flowering plant unless you went up to it and lifted the leaf. And behind that leaf is a tiny little flower that looks like a Dutchman's pipe. And usually that's in bloom really late June, early mid-July. So that's an interesting thing to go looking for. Just a couple of years ago, we planted a climbing hydrangea on one of the posts of the pergola. So given a couple more years and that will really be taken off. This section of arborvitaes right here behind the bittersweet, Those arborvitaes are kind of hollowed out in the center, and it provides what we call the toad abode. It's a darling little area that the children love to play in. They can scoot around. It's got an entrance and an exit, and there's little treasures in there. There are little things hanging from the inner branches. There is even a plastic keeper box that there's a couple books that they could look at, a few gardening books. On a really hot day, it's kind of a nice little retreat. It's quite cool in there. And the kids just love to be scooting in and out of that toad abode. Now we're just on the other side of the path. So on the right side of the path from the pond area and the pergola, this is an interesting plant. It's an Amsonia. It has a thread-like leaf structure. It's a bright green. And when it's in bloom in the summer, and it blooms early, it has a pale bluish purple blossom on it. This gets almost shrub-like. It's about 4 to 5 feet tall and 4 to 5 feet wide. But you'll see that there's kind of a darkened area right in here. In the next picture or two, you'll see what that's all about. But look at this beautiful dome and the glass work here. And I'll talk more about that on the next couple of slides. So here's a close-up of that darkened structure, and you see that it's a viney plant. Well, when you look at the summer picture on the right-hand slide, it's a clematis. It is not the Amsonia. And I was out there a couple of years ago. In fact, it was the first year I was involved in Master Gardeners. It was the weekend of the open house. And I thought, what is that big white flower in the Amsonia? The Amsonia has been done blooming for weeks, and it also has a tiny blue flower, not a large white flower. So I went over, and on closer investigation, here it was this beautiful clematis or clematis, which is actually I guess the correct way to pronounce it. But there's that clematis. So it's the rogue plant because the clematis are pretty much all on this tunnel structure growing up over the tunnel. So there it is in the summer months, and here are the dried leftovers of it in the winter. As you can see, looking into this area here in the dome, these are mosaic garden benches that different master gardeners have done in memory of members, either of master gardeners or members in their family. And there's a beautiful wind chime in there. And this is just a lovely spot to just come and sit on kind of a warm summer day and just reflect and appreciate the joy and beauty of life and the garden surrounding you. Listening to the birds, listening to the wind chime. And then as you can see in the summer picture, how beautifully that tunnel area is covered with the clematis and the different glass structures, which I'll talk a little bit about in a few more minutes. So now we're wandering down the path a little further, and we've got the snow-covered coneflowers or the echinacea. These plants are actually sturdy enough for the birds to perch on and eat the seeds right off of the pods. But it's so pretty to see that fresh cap of snow on the plant. And it's delightful in the wintertime if you're quiet enough and just have coneflowers planted in your own yard, just to sit there and watch the birds come to it and feed off of it. So here's another picture of yet a smaller version of, this probably is not a coneflower. This is probably one of the black-eyed Susans. But anyhow, you just have all of this beautiful snow-capped covering. I think the plant to the back here might be, I can't tell if that's shrub-like, and I don't recall the day that I was taking pictures. It's got a heavier snow cover, so it was hard to tell what was underneath that. Here we are back at the dome, and I want to spend a little time talking about this dome structure. A few years ago, for those of you who've been out there in the summer months, you know that it was very shade. It was completely covered by vine and absolutely gorgeous, well-shaded area. Well, we learned that the major vine that was on the dome was called a 5-leafed akebia vine. And we learned that it was on the invasive list and it was restricted. So we were figuring, okay, as long as we keep an eye on it, it should be okay. Well, then a year or two later, we learned from the Door County invasive plant team that it had now been moved up into the prohibited list on the plant list, which meant that it had to be removed. So we spent a better part of some days last year cutting the vine and removing, and then we waited until fall and we pulled all of the vines off of the dome. And in the process of doing that, I realized how much scroll work was in this metal structure of this dome and how beautiful it was. And most of that was completely covered by the vine. We're not quite done with the eradication process. The invasive team will be helping us this spring or early summer, June, and into a little bit in July of finishing up with the eradication process. And then we do need to wait for most of the summer until we can replant anything. So around the outside of the dome area will be a work in progress for a while. There are still some vines on there. One of the vines is the wild grapevine, which was quite beautiful. There were grapes hanging inside this year from the vine. And there's also some wisteria on it. So we're hoping that we'll be able to salvage those plants during the final eradication process. This plant here, which is right next to the Amsonia, is a baptisia or wild indigo, a wild blue indigo. This has a really pretty leaf structure and color. The color of the leaves, the foliage is more to the blue, green, gray side rather than a vibrant green, which just gives another added color component to your garden. It flowers probably early mid-July. The blossoms last a while. There are a lot of different varieties of baptisia. There are many hybrid varieties. The false blue indigo is native. There's a yellow native, and there's also a white native. And then the rest are all hybrids of the baptisia, but they're a beautiful plant. They too get quite large, bush-like, 4 to 5 feet tall and wide. They don't like to be moved. They have a kind of a deep taproot system. So once you've planted it, make sure that you don't, so plant it in the correct spot. The other thing that's really interesting about this that I really enjoy is as this season develops going into late summer and fall, it develops a black seed pod on it, which is very interesting to see. So again, a nice winter interest because a lot of that darkened is those black seed pods. And if I didn't mention, I may have forgotten, the Amsonia, as it goes into late summer and early fall, those leaves turn a really pretty yellow. And pretty much, as you noticed earlier, it kind of had that yellow hue rather than a brown. Once again, here's that really pretty hydrangea that I mentioned earlier, way off in the background in the shade garden. And I'll talk a little more. I'll get closer to it later on and have some pictures. But look at this beautiful glasswork that's been mounted, that's been created and designed by one of our master gardeners. We've got a lot of master gardeners that do glass work. We're fortunate enough to have the Hendersons in the organization, and they have a glass studio, which many of us enjoy working at. Unfortunately, with the whole COVID crisis, we've not been able to be up at the glass house, but hopefully once that's behind us, we'll be able to start going up to the glass studio again. But this installation is just absolutely exquisite. It just gives another dimension. It brings in color in the wintertime, but yet there's also beautiful color in the throughout the summer. And here we have, this is one of our newest additions. It's the fence that divides the cactus garden and one of the perennial gardens. We had a split rail fence there, which had seen its better days. And so one of our master gardeners designed and built this fence and just installed it in late October, early November. I really like the way this sort of complements that Wentz fence in the background here behind the grass garden. So yes, I did mention cactus. It's right behind the cactus garden. There are cacti that grow in Wisconsin in this zone. So if you want to have a spectacular display of flowers in the summertime, be sure that you come out in probably late June, mid-June, and see the flowers, which are just incredible. So to the back of this fence then is another one of the large perennial beds. And as you can see, all of these standing dried flowers, there's bee balm and black-eyed Susans, there's daisies in there, there's cone flowers, there's goldenrod. So this garden is in bloom from early spring until late fall. There's asters in here. So this is just an exquisite, another exquisite example of the things that we have in the garden door. So now we're right to our garden shed, which is at the far north end of the garden on the east side. We've got the espaliered apple tree, which is on the side of the shed. And we've got one apple there that came, we had a few blossoms and we got one apple from it. But I love the winter picture. Here the snow was melting and dripping off the roof and creating just these great icicle formations on the branches of the espaliered apple tree. Now we're standing right in front of the garden shed, just looking towards the gazebo. You see a little bit of the tunnel of the garden, and these tall plants here are asters. The shorter here are the cone flowers, more cone flowers. Here's some goldenrod. Here we've got a sunflower that's already got its head drooping down because that pod is so heavy with seeds. But the birds are able to eat from all of these seeds. So this is a great source of food for the birds. Now I'm standing on the path right on the edge of this large perennial garden here. And here's that fence that's dividing that perennial and the cactus garden. So I'm looking back towards where we entered. So here's that Amsonia that we had talked about. Here's the rose garden up front. And then you weave around and see the pond. So we're at the back side of this garden and we can approach and walk into the tunnel that way. This next picture, oops, I went back, sorry. So here we are now at the pollinator garden, which is on the other side of the path from that large perennial bed just adjacent to the garden shed. So these two beautiful metal sculpture butterflies were also created by master gardeners. So we've got people who do metal work as well. And again, the pollinator garden, everything is still standing. I guess I took more of the picture of the butterflies and the limestone rock than much of what's standing in the pollinator garden. This small pergola that was built by another master gardener is offering shade to the grasses that need to have shade grasses. There are not that many, but there are a few that cannot be in full sun. So this is sort of the start of the shade garden, and then it comes all around this way and along the path that we'll now be taking next. So we've got a number of grasses here. These arborvitae are really encroaching upon our shade garden, but we have to So we'll have to be moving some of our grasses out of the way this year because the arborvitaes are just going to take them over. So here is, sorry about that. Here is a picture of many of the grasses. So grasses are beautiful in the summer. There are some variegated grasses, so there's interesting color in the greens. We also have some grasses that there's a blood grass, which is mostly red. It's interesting that that survives in this climate because typically it does well zone 6 or higher. So it's interesting that it survives, but we'd have multiple microclimates here in Door County. And we believe that with the shade or the protection of the wind that it gets from these arborvitaes, because the blood grass is right here, that it gets enough warmth that it can actually manage our temperatures here. But we just have these exquisite grasses, some that get to be 8-10 feet tall. Again, they're beautiful in the summer months, but grasses truly take on the glory in the mid-late fall when all of these plumes start to develop and you see all those feathery plumes that just gently flow in the breeze. And then there's our bottle tree, which has a interesting, very ancient history to the bottle tree. So just another idea of the grasses. This is a Miscanthus purpurescens, which is a flame grass. But just, when a little bit of snow can collect on that, or if it's a little bit windy, just to see them swaying in the breeze is quite elegant. So now we're right across from the grass garden, and here's the entrance to the tunnel to get into that dome area. And this has a lot of these flowers, as you can see, just like it had at the other end, that have been mounted. But just absolutely beautiful. So this gives you a little wider view of the garden that we have. Here's looking back at the pond area, another garden bench. This is the center of the dome where those benches, those mosaic benches are. And here's just a close-up of those beautiful flower installations. I hadn't moved here to Door County yet when these were first installed, but it was my understanding that shortly after they were installed, sometime in May, you had a freak ice storm or a hailstorm, and it did a fair amount of damage to a lot of the glass work. There were some broken pieces, some of the flowers were just left up. Because it kind of shows what Mother Nature can do. But some of the pieces were completely destroyed, and they just picked up all the glass pieces and made new ones, incorporated that glass into other pieces. But just look at it not only brings your eye closer to the texture of the wood, it kind of plays off of that texture, and this one in particular, this big knot in this piece of wood, and then that flower mounted right on it. So now we're inside the tunnel looking out. This view on the right-hand picture, we're looking over at the pond. So here's that weeping tree that I had talked about earlier. Here's the Fat Albert. And then in the summer months, you can barely see through there because there's a lot of tall plants. There's asters, there's black-eyed Susans. There's all different varieties of plants that are just completely just enclosing this tunnel meshwork. And then this one, we are looking out to the, east side of the garden area. Here you can see the green of that pot in the sedum garden. And then just another one of the glass sculptures with the snow covering, and another one. And here in the background, we've got, what is going on here? I'm so sorry. We've got asters that are mostly all still standing, and we've got a lot of the different clematis that are the dried clematis on the vines. This is just another view. This is right between the dome and the tunnel itself, looking out towards the gazebo. So here we are at the gazebo, and we've got this very hardy honeysuckle vine that was still had flowers hanging on it in December, that beautiful deep reddish maroon color. Just shows you the tenacity of these flowers. But that plant, that honeysuckle vine was planted just 2 or 3 years ago. So it's really going to be taking off in the next year and covering a fair amount of that gazebo railings. And well, what is going on here? So one last look at the grass garden. So now this is kind of on our way into near the rock garden. And I don't really have pictures of the rock garden itself, but the next show, this is the magnolia tree. So I just love this, these fuzzy little buds that are already on it, because they set their buds shortly after they bloom, or they set their buds in during the summer months. So these are going to be will bloom early summer. So you really need to know your plants and when you should and could be pruning them, because you certainly wouldn't want to be pruning something like this in the fall months, because you'd be removing all of the buds and you wouldn't have any flowers for that summer. Here we are just approaching the shade garden now. We've got 2 different plants. The one on the left is an astilbe. Astilbes come in many, many different varieties. They can be in bloom from early June until August, the different varieties. They also have, some of the varieties have red colored stems, a deep red. Some leaf patterns are a much darker green, a glossier green. The flowers range from white and pink and peach, a deep red. So there's a lot of variety there. So if people say, oh, I've got a shade garden, so I can't have any flowers, there are a lot of different plants that flower in the shade garden. Then the picture on the right is a Rodgersia. But just notice how that snow nestles on both of those Rodgersia and those astilbes. They're both pretty sturdy and they give lovely winter definition. And then notice how the sedges, these grass-like structures to the back of this Rodgersia, are still green. So there they are, poking through the snow, still green, and it's already in early mid-December. Now, this was a real interesting surprise for me. The picture on the right is not a summertime picture. I took this in late October, early November, and I was shocked to see that here we had an allium in bloom. And I was like, well, I know that alliums don't bloom in fall, so what is this? Well, yes, it's an allium. It's called an ozawa, O-Z-A-W-A. And I went home and researched it. It's a fall blooming allium. So when I was out there doing my winter photos, here it is. It's a low mounded plant. So it's pretty much covered in snow. But notice, I am so sorry. Notice you can still see that pale kind of pinkish purple of that ozawa blossom. So quite beautiful. Just need to take your time to look and observe and enjoy the beauty of the gardens. This just gives you a nice larger view of the garden. So I am at the far south end looking north. Whoops. So here are those green pots that we've seen a couple of different times. So the picture on the right during the summer months is that everything is in full bloom. We've got this beautiful spiral sedum garden right here to the front. The green pots, they've got some annual flowers in there, but then we also have more of that glass work that does stay in there year round. And then the taller green pot at the far end of the sedum garden. So a lot of pops of color. So just taking you down this path, for a summertime picture, here's the thyme garden. It's all different varieties of creeping thyme, and there's a human sundial. So if you ever are out there in the summer, be sure to see if you can tell the time by following the instructions that are written there for doing the time. And then this little arbor here, this is right in the entryway into the herb garden. There's a delightful herb garden, which we always encourage people to pinch and scruff up the leaves and smell, because you get all of those wonderful smells of lavender and rosemary and parsley and whatever else is in there. And then behind that, you see the roof of the gazebo. So the winter interest picture is, look at how that pop of green gives us some color in the garden. We see the purples of the flowers, the glass flowers. And then this was taken from two different views. This is from the south going north on the summer one. This picture in the winter garden is from the north looking south. So we're looking back towards the parking lot area and at the shade garden. Right here, you see that edge of brown. That's that hydrangea that I had talked about earlier, which I think is coming up pretty soon. Look at this beautiful viburnum. Viburnums are, there are many, many different varieties. They are very hardy plants. An interesting, very interesting leaf texture of this particular one, and those great red berries. But then look at that winter picture. I mean, those berries nestled in that snow, and this too is giving feed to the birds for the winter months. And then here's that hydrangea. Look at how pretty that is, just covered with the snow nestled in around it. So now that brings us to talk about why you shouldn't remove your plants in the fall. I always thought that I was just a lazy fall gardener because I just didn't cut anything back. But it was because my hands got too cold and I didn't really like gardening in the fall. So I always left everything up. Then fast forward to a number of years, and I decided to dig up my entire front yard when I lived in Milwaukee and plant a front yard garden. Well, I did a bit of research and had a book on it, front yard gardening, and they had an entire chapter devoted to the winter interest. And I thought, oh, well, all right. So as you can see, we just saw that beautiful winter interest. But more importantly, we need to leave that fall garden intact, because did you know that there are over 3,500 species of native bees? They need a place to spend the winter protected from the cold and predators. So they use the peeled back bark from trees. They use the hollow stems from plants. So your bee balm, your grasses, your asclepias that they harbor in, or eggs and larvae may be found in a burrow in the ground. Our bees are really important pollinators. We need them, so we must offer winter habitat. Then moving on to butterflies. Well, we all know that the monarchs go south. They spend their winter in Mexico. However, did you know that there are many species that stay and need to have shelter somewhere dry and safe until spring? Some nestle into rock fissures or under tree bark or in leaf litter. Some species, such as the viceroy or the meadow fritillary, actually spend the winter as a caterpillar. So they are rolled up in a fallen leaf or inside the seed pod of a host plant. And then some, like those in the swallowtail family, actually winter in a chrysalis form. And you might find them hanging from a dead branch, plant stem, or tucked into leaf litter. So if we did all of that vigorous fall cleanup, we'd lose all of this. We would lose all of this. So if we practice fall cleanup, you're taking away all those beautiful pollinators. This is yet another good reason not to do a fall cleanup. Ladybugs. Oh my gosh, there are 400 different species of native ladybugs, most overwinter in groups. And entering into that insect's version of hibernation, they enter into that insect's version of hibernation shortly after the temperatures drop. They spend the winters under a pile of leaves. That's kind of a recurring theme here, isn't it? Or nestled at the base of a plant, hidden under a rock. They are great pest eaters. They each consume dozens of soft-bodied pest insects and insect eggs every day. So if you leave your garden intact, that gives you, the gardener, a jump start on pest control in the spring. Again, skipping garden cleanup is a really important way for the beneficial insects. So now we move on to the birds. There are many insect-eating birds. They feed on thousands of caterpillars and other pest insects as they raise their young every gardening season. But by not cleaning up the garden means that they are also have the opportunity for protein-rich insects during the coldest part of the year. These birds are really good at searching out the hibernating insects in the dead plants and brush and the leaves. So if you leave that there for them, the more insect nurturing habitat you have, the greater your bird population will be. And they certainly will appreciate being able to feast on the seeds and the berries that they collect from the dried seed pods and the shrub branches. So songbirds are yet another reason for leaving your garden intact. So a fifth reason, if we haven't already had enough, bugs, insects, predatory insects. There are a number of predatory insects that spend the winter hibernating in your garden, either as adults, eggs, or pupae. These guys are a great reason to not clean up the garden because they control other pests. So if you have a balanced population of the predatory insects, you must have a winter habitat so that when spring arrives, they'll be better able to keep up to the early emerging pests that are coming into your garden. So if they've spent the winter on site rather in your yard than your neighbor's yard, you get that benefit. Okay, so we've already had 5 reasons, and if that wasn't enough for you, how about the sixth reason, I'm sorry. People, you, me, the master gardeners. We want to look at the beauty that's found in a winter garden. As you saw, snow resting on dried seed pods, bright berries clinging to bare branches, goldfinches perching on sunflowers or coneflowers, the juncos hopping beneath the goldenrods, and ice collected on blades of ornamental grass. It's an absolute winter wonderland out there. Wouldn't you love to just be able to go out and enjoy that? So if you're able to get out, why don't you go out to a nature center and enjoy the beauty of winter? Now, you must wait until spring and then wait a little bit longer. It's advised that you wait for 7 to 14 days once temperatures have reached 50 degrees to allow the bugs to emerge from their areas. If you have trouble waiting because we're all itching to get back out in our gardens, you can cut your things back, but then just layer that brush gently over your garden beds to give the critters a chance to kind of crawl out and find another spot to wait out those next couple of weeks. Does anybody have any questions? Do we have questions in the chat box?
Jess, do we have some questions?
We don't have any questions on Facebook right now. I do have a question. Is it free to go to the garden door?
Is it
free?
What? Free? Yes.
Yep.
There is no charge for the garden door. Unfortunately, due to the COVID crisis last year, we did not open to the public. It was only open to the master gardeners to maintain the gardens. We're keeping our fingers crossed that this year, and that was a directive from the Agricultural Research Station. They just were concerned about their employees and the people on their property, that they didn't want to worry about the process. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that we will be able to be there this year. So we'll have to stay tuned for that. I think I just want to go back to share my screen for one more minute because
sorry about that.
That's all right.
Stopped it because I thought we were going into questions. So
well, there was just a resource page here that I had.
Oh yeah.
The information about the 6 reasons not to clean up was in an article in savvygardening.com written by Jessica Walliser, who is a horticulturist. I think I provided most of the information. And then the Door County Master Gardeners have a great website. If you go to dcmga.org and click on the garden door, you can get the garden door fact sheet, which is a 2-page document. You can get a history of the garden door, which is a 5-page document. And then you can get information on all of the plants that are planted in the garden door. There's plant lists for each separate garden. So now if we have other questions, if you want to stop my, here, I guess I can click stop share, can't I? There. All right. Does anybody else have questions?
I just have a couple of comments.
Yes.
We have a program at the end of March. Jess, you'll have to say the date.
The
We
24th, I believe.
24th of March, we have an invasive species program.
Oh, they're fabulous.
Yeah, so be watching for that. I think
It's led by Lydia, who is our green tier specialist here, and then also Sam Rock from Door County Soil and Water, who's on the DCIS team.
Mm-hmm.
Identification, I believe, and removal of invasive species. So,
and invasive species look different depending on the season. So, it'll be an important program to take a look at if you have that time available. Also, at our libraries, we have lots of resources, books for gardeners. I know I have a pergola book sitting on my couch at home. I'm trying to figure out the whole pergola thing. And we have some great magazines, Birds and Blossoms. We've got Mother Earth, the Heirloom Gardener, lots of great resources. So all the libraries in Door County have lots of great resources to share with you. So, Sue, that was fascinating.
Thank you. Thank you.
I love that we learned that we don't have to do a cleanup in fall.
Well, isn't it fabulous? I mean, and we're taking care of our insects and our bugs and our birds. And so, yes. Well,
I learned that there was a lot of bugs from my vet who said you need to make sure you're giving your pets, I've lost the word, but I thought that ticks went away in the winter. No, they don't. So the good bugs are around and the bad ones are, they're around. It has to be really cold for a tick not to be around. So yeah, learning something every day.
As we all should be.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Any more questions out there, Jess?
I don't see any on Facebook. I don't know if anyone on the Zoom has any questions. I don't think so.
All right. Well, this will become a video that will be kept on YouTube with the Door County Libraries. So if you want to show it again next year, Sue, it's available. We'll get that information to you. And yes, and the rest of you can find it there too. We have great, if you're looking for some education credits, go to Door County Libraries YouTube station, and there are some great programs for master gardeners to get educational credits, which this was, correct, Sue?
Yes, this is an hour worth of your continuing education credit. So there you go. Enter it in to your online reporting. So
Will do.
yes.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. And hey, any of you, if you're good spellers or bad spellers, we're having a spelling bee next Wednesday at 2:00. So join us next week, Wednesday, for our spelling bee. But thank you for joining us. And thank you, Sue, for coming out on this cold day, cold but sunny day.
Yes.
We really enjoyed
it. It was fun.
your show. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye now.
Everyone.